Liebe Zuschauerinnen und liebe Zuschauer.
Dear viewers, dear listeners, greetings to our second program entitled Astral Horror. With this series, we want to explain to people and encourage them to take their life in hand, not only in relation to their lifetime on Earth, but also in relation to what happens beyond our physical death, because our soul lives eternally. Mankind's lack of knowledge about the life of the soul after the demise of the body is unendingly great. The suffering of many souls unimaginable. Unfortunately, there is so much abstruse information on this topic that is simply categorized under the term spirituality, whether found in churches or in esoteric circles, that seeking people have a very hard time orienting themselves in this often astral mixture of perceptions and false teachings. Above all, the priestmen of the churches also share the responsibility for this spiritual lack of orientation among people about the life of the soul after death, because they claim to have an expertise about this that they never had and still do not have. What kind of truly spiritual knowledge do they have to impart? Anyone who looks more closely can say nothing, really not a thing. But just as before, when it's all about existential questions concerning life, they are still sitting atop their allegedly infallible dogmas, rites, and ceremonies, lamenting for countless generations amidst swirling billows of incense about the mysteries of God. But, of course, this only proves that they know nothing about God in us, about life and the soul, nor about life after death, and also haven't learned anything more about it during the last 2,000 years. Mother Earth, as well as all cosmoses or universes, are continually in evolution because life is simply evolution, on this side of life as well as in the beyond. Only the institutional universe of the churches has become more and more rigid under the unexpiated burden of countless crimes against the life that is Christ. Rigid in its self-created causes and an antiquated image of God, the roots of which can be proven to come, to a great extent, from the cults of Baal in ancient times, that is, from paganism. What you will be hearing about in this series about the life of the soul after death has nothing to do with the churches or with esotericism. What you will be hearing here has nothing to do with any kind of dubious speculation and spiritual conceptions, nor with past life regressions or near-death experiences that include visions of light or tunnels, nor with hypnosis and much, much more. And whatever else many an esoteric and alleged astral specialist may have to offer to gullible people from their spiritual kaleidoscope of techniques. Dear fellow people, we are saying this so clearly and unmistakably simply because this is truly a very serious and unhappy topic that sooner or later concerns all of us. For thousands of years, many people have been seeking, in the hazy mists of external religions and belief systems, credible accounts of the continuing life of the soul after the demise of the human being. The source of the truth about this can only be God. And at all times, God has sent us His speaking instruments, prophets and prophetesses. He never sent priests and esoterics.
Sandte keine Priester und Esoteriker. Auch in der heutigen
And
Zeit
also in today's time, for over 36 years, God, the Eternal, has been speaking through the mouth of a prophet to the people of all cultures worldwide. It is the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, the one God about whom Jesus of Nazareth gave us an understanding as a loving Father. The free Spirit sent into this turn of time a great teaching prophetess, who is a part of the great line of prophets of God like Abraham, Moses, and Isaiah. It is Gabriele, whom he designates as his prophetess and emissary. In this series of programs, Astral Horror, the prophetess of God, Gabriele, gives us from her open consciousness insight into the life of the soul after the demise of the human body, based on the law that says, "You will reap what you sow."
Was der Mensch sät, wird ernten.
Machen wir uns bewusst.
Let us become aware of the fact that every feeling of contempt, all addictions and excesses, the brutality, every act of violence and force towards people, animals, and nature, towards all of the earth, is justly allocated to every single person and his soul in detail. Many people unscrupulously torture animals. They keep them in animal ghettos to be slaughtered. The animals are often bestially killed in the slaughterhouses. Their meat is consumed, or they are kept in scientific laboratories for experimental purposes. Human beings act as if animals were lifeless commodities. For example, the hunter slinks through the woods, often hiding in the high seat he built for himself so that he can underhandedly shoot down the unsuspecting animal, which then, often having only been wounded, may drag itself along for days on end in fear and pain until it miserably perishes.
Or let us think of the farmer who applies his combat agents against the life of the soil, such as, for example, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, and whatever else can be obtained as means of extermination. He also spreads animal and human excrements on the topsoil. With all these attacks on nature, the life of the soil contorts in convulsions and then suffocates. The farmer cares little whether the animals destined to be slaughtered have a miserable existence in unworthy stalls until they are transported to the butcher, who then brutally kills them. After all, his religion has determined that animals have no soul. They are an economic factor. The cruel animal experiments are carried out in many places without any stirring of conscience, because the religious representative of certain types of people claim that animals have no soul. They are nothing more than a commodity to be freely and arbitrarily utilized at will.
Does this coarse society really believe that this and more will remain without consequences? The immoderateness and disregard toward the animal world apparently has no limits. But animals do have a soul, very much so. Their creator is God, who breathed the life into them, something we will hear more about. To repeat, let it be said that human being and soul bear the engraving of all that is unlawful and which the person causes to his fellow man, but also to the earth and to the animal and plant world. This and more are the works of the individual person, works that follow him. After the demise of the physical body, these works of the person remain in his soul as a corresponding engraving, unless the person recognized in good time his often bestial, negative behavior, his vices, and remedied them by taking the steps that Jesus of Nazareth showed us. His words state the following: settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. It would be good and right if we, each and every person, were to critically and seriously question himself each day. For example, who am I? Or where will I be after my soul has become discarnate?
Wo werde ich nach der Entkörperung meiner Seele sein?
Das ist richtig.
That's right. But let us also not be deceived by hypocritical sanctimoniousness, as we can so often read on gravestone epitaphs like, "He is now with God," or "May she rest in peace," or "He has now found peace," or "freed from long suffering." And don't believe the well-sounding speeches of the priests or pastors who stand at the grave of the deceased with raised voice, giving a theatrical ending using the same old stories such as, "He, God the Eternal, has now seen fit to take so-and-so home to him. Earth to earth and dust to dust, may he or she now rest in peace." Or we hear such things as, "Died in Christ, risen in Christ, and now lives in eternal bliss," etc. Surely there are more such unctuous words of comfort for the bereaved.
Most people believe in science. Many know that no energy is lost. So, if everything is energy, where do all the hostilities go when the person has died? Who nurtures the hostility? Your neighbor or you? Who should be responsible for it? Where does this energy go? Who created the negative energy? John Smith? Or you? Many believe that after passing away, suddenly everything is light-filled. Here the question is, where did the bad boy go with all the negative aspects? If you believe what the priest describes at the grave, then you are responsible for believing this, not the priest. And if he got you to believe this, then he bears his part of the blame. But you have a brain to think with, and you also cannot blame the brain because it is you as well. What would the bereaved say if it were said of the deceased, "His works not only follow him, but are engraved in his soul"? This is the way it is. And according to the law of sowing and reaping, according to their causality, they bear fruit. This has already been passed down, because in Revelations we can read, and I quote, "Then I heard a voice from heaven say, 'Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on.' Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them." End of quote. Let us look more closely at this. What are these deeds, these works that go with most souls? In the end, they are all the wrongdoings of the person that are still waiting to be cleared up. It simply is the way it is. After the demise of the person, the soul is what its person was prior to his or her demise. After the eulogy or funeral oration, we hear for comfort, "I knew this person for a long time," or "I knew the deceased for many years."
Ich kannte den nun hingeschiedenen Menschen viele Jahre.
We should reflect on the fact that no person can totally figure out another person, not even a pastor or a priest. The human being is an ambiguous being who speaks with a forked tongue in many situations. Most people are not even aware of this because most people don't know themselves. They don't fathom what takes place behind their patterns of behavior. Few make the effort to explore their hidden ways, their ambiguity, by analyzing themselves with the question, "Who actually am I, really?" Most people live in self-deception, that is, irrationally. They vegetate away their days, and, as a matter of course, consider themselves to be better than their fellow man.
To the same extent that the person doesn't know himself, his discarnate soul will not get its bearings after the death of his body. The soul will attain more clarity in itself only when a higher being accompanying the soul can find a way to touch the soul with its indications. The soul will gradually become aware of what is presently active in it as a pro and con, and that what lies on the con side, the debt, needs to be remedied. But not every soul is prepared to accept the help from above, from its guardian and teacher. The imprinting that the human being inflicts upon his soul often has far-reaching consequences. A heavily burdened soul, which has engraved on it the human tendency to think that matter alone is the ultimate, will resist every help. Many of these souls have been programmed by their former person and cannot let go of their desires and passions, of their thirst for revenge, of hostility, and cruel philosophies of life.
Souls that were oriented toward matter by their person don't readily take the steps indicated to them by a cosmic repository planet or a higher being. And yet, it is exactly this that would be the path on which the soul could rectify its negativities, the burdensome, the path on which it could continue on its spiritual evolution, that is, its further development, in order to truly attain a higher quality of life. A soul that was programmed with a tendency towards profligacy is like its former person, for example, in terms of unfulfilled desires. It is as its person once was. It is bound to sundry human habits like prestige, wealth, money, avarice, power, but also to licentious desires and more, and will always long for the same.
Let us make ourselves aware of the fact that the human existence is not real. If it were truly a reality, the physical body would not have to pass away. Then the human being would have everlasting youth. Hans-Peter Dürr, the former head of the Max Planck Institute of Physics in Munich, said the following, and rightly so. I quote, "What we call this side of life is basically the dross, matter, that which is tangible. Seen in this way, the human being is satisfied with the dross, which, among other things, is the ego. Every soul is finer material and invisible, intangible for the human being. And yet it is present, for, in terms of energy, this side of life flows into the beyond and vice versa. If the soul is tied to the world of desires of its former person, then it is open for a new human birth on earth. In the end, every human birth already contains death. With its incarnation, every soul brings with itself what was not rectified in the beyond as a soul. What was not rectified in the beyond can break open again on this side of life, that is, as a human being.
Die Lebensinhalte vieler Menschen,
the life substance of many people is marked by virtual ways and means. The person behaves according to this condition, and later, the discarnate soul. As stated, this side of life and the beyond are not separated from one another. Bound to the all-too-human characteristics of their ego world, souls bend people to their will for their own purposes, people they can reach, people who live in similar worlds of thoughts and desires as they do, and who practice those vices which fit their own perverted desires. Souls, which based on their engravings cannot let go of this world, are also called earthbound souls. The whereabouts of earthbound souls are the in-between spheres within the material macrocosm, near the earth.
The souls that we ourselves have programmed and that may be controlled by demons do not utilize anything different than what was familiar to their former human being. For example, one who had something to do with computer technology. The demon state, which fights against God, doesn't develop anything new, but merely reverses the spiritual divine law for its own base corrupt purposes. The spiritual divine law is send and receive, and communicate with the All-One, who is God. The adversary reversed it to send and receive and communicate with the negative forces. An example from a conversation with a computer freak can help give insight to many a fatal development. Every computer works on the basis of its programming, which the respective computer owner has programmed into the computer. He works with these programs and saves all the data that he wants to keep. So the decision is left to the owner of the computer what he wants to do with the programs in his computer. He enters into his computer what he thinks is good and right. He saves some of it, particularly what he needs for the long term, and other things, in turn, are deleted because they are no longer important to him. The user of the computer thus moves around in the computer world that has been shaped by him with the programs that he himself chose and built up, with which he occupies himself and from which he develops further uses. This, his individual computer world, is to an extent his identity. What happens now with a so-called computer virus or a computer Trojan? If an outside computer user wants to utilize the data or operating system to damage it, or use the main memory, the RAM, to gain something for himself, then he plants so-called viruses into the computer system. These viruses contain foreign programs which, based on the available programming, convert the computer to now be utilized for the purposes of the one who intruded on another's computer system, making it serve him. Of course, the owner of the computer will not readily grant entry to the intruder. So how do viruses and Trojans get into the system? In important aspects, they proceed quite like the earthbound souls do, which seek victims among the human beings in order to appropriate the latter's energies for themselves. So, just like the souls, these viruses help themselves to the available programs of the host. In this case, the computer, in order to slip into the system via data, which the computer doesn't recognize as not being its data at all, because these contain the same or like aspects which are already stored in the computer. Other programs are infiltrated into the existing operating system. Since these foreign programs are basically the same as or like the programs of the computer, the host computer does not recognize them as foreign, but accepts them on the assumption that they are its own programs. This is why these foreign programs are called Trojans. Just like the Trojan horse, which was allowed into the besieged city, and its soldiers only poured out of the rump of the horse to then conquer the city from within. It is exactly in this way that the Trojan programs act in the computers. They expose their real intentions only when they are within the system they want to conquer. If this goal is reached, then it is possible, depending on the intention of the outside operator, that the whole programming of the computer can be utilized from the outside, thus using the storage capacity of the computer. Through this, the host computer is damaged. Its performance is reduced. It has faulty functions or is even totally damaged and can even come to a total computer crash. It is possible that the outside operator, the hacker, also uses the stored data of the host computer to gain, for example, a financial advantage.
What takes place in the computer world through hackers is basically no different than what the astral hackers do with human beings. To a certain extent, they use the similarities of the life programs of the person and his available negative patterns to tune into the operating system of the human being. That is, to influence him more and more, appropriating him, possessing him, intending to successively gain the upper hand unnoticed, and to reshape the possessed person in such a way that the contents of the world of programs of the astral hacker can be fulfilled. This can then lead to a fatal change in the utilized human being, who allows himself to be used. His own habitual programs fulfill and carry him less and less. He becomes more and more foreign to himself. Such a development can so easily end with the downfall of this person.
Mit Recht fragt man sich,
Rightfully so. We wonder, how do virtual astral souls, that is, soul beings, get hold of the corresponding people to bend them to their will and thus, through coinciding programs, experience what agrees with their own world of desires. The cosmic law of equality states, like waves of energy always seek out like wavelengths. We also say, like attracts like. The materialistic world of today and its human beings, with their virtual thinking and behaving, with their profligacy, their addictions, greed, and their manifold excesses and desires, offer bound souls a welcome nesting place in their aura, and perhaps later in their bodies. The urge of an earthbound soul is the indispensable desire to experience everything as it once was for it as a human being, in thoughts and occasionally in the deed. Its fascination, that which it once lived in thoughts and which was partially fulfilled, makes it hope to find a victim, a person of its nature, through whom it, as a human being, without loss of prestige, can live out unhindered its lusts, its vices, greed, and striving for power. The soul is on the prowl. If it comes upon a human being like it, then it tries, as stated, to bend the latter to its will. How does this happen?
Once the earthbound soul has found a human being with the same or like tendencies, the soul emits to this person energetically. The intent of the soul is that its victim, the person, desire and do what it has in mind, so that it can influence him and possess him as soon as possible. At first, such souls beguile their victims in a way that is invisible to the person. Then they send into his aura kindred feelings, profligate compulsive behavior, etc. A soul can reach a victim more quickly and easily if a human being simply takes each day as it comes, without goals of its own. That is, when it carries out what is in accord with the world of desires of the soul, without resistance and submissively.
In
a conversation with a person who collects information on this, further interesting aspects to the topic astral horror emerged. Through the increasing application of technology and industrialization, the earth, with all of nature, the animals and people, is exposed to the most varying environmental influences, to an until now unknown magnitude. No sphere of life is spared today from multiple experiments to manipulate nature and to gain influence over the most varying forms of life via radiation. But let's keep in mind the fact that for every encroachment on the natural, God-given order, the law of sowing and reaping applies, sending and receiving. And each one who sets causes into motion has to inevitably bear the effects at some point in time.
Who has set a cause into motion, and to what extent, and which corresponding effects he has to bear accordingly, is very precisely weighed and measured in its energy, according to the cosmic justice. If people suffer under global consequences, like, for example, atomic radiation, the destruction of the ozone layer, or the irradiation of highly technological attack and defense systems, then the one who may suffer from a faulty performance or weakness and other things because of these influences does not burden himself. Instead, all those who develop such systems and apply them bear the greatest blame. But also those who endorse these, including the lawmakers who create the conditions which make such and similar manipulations at all possible.
Manipulationen erst ermöglichen. Leiden also Menschen.
So if people suffer under such systems, then those affected are not the ones who burden themselves, but those who cause it or who consider it a good thing. What people do, prompted by manipulation with radiation, whether for reasons of weakness or the influence of their nervous system, takes effect in the law of sowing and reaping, not as the guilt of the one who is injured anyway. Instead, those who developed and endorsed these systems have to answer for this bad development.
Die diese Systeme entwickelt und befürwortet haben.
The same holds true for the waste and immense pollution of the natural resources of the earth. Through the use of pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, which are spread on the fields in agriculture and kill off the microorganisms, but even by applying animal excrements like manure and slurry, the groundwater is polluted and the drinking water contaminated. The dirty water has to be treated and partly enriched with chemical substances in order to be fed into the supply of drinking water for the population again. This water, that is no longer clean, but burdened with additives, presumably will, in turn, inevitably cause damage. However, the causal law will not attribute the blame to those who drink the water, but to those who contaminated the water through their unlawful actions, thus causing this ill state of affairs.
Das Wasser verunreinigt, also den Übelstand verursacht haben.
It is similar with the breeding of animals. Whoever breeds new animal types through artificial insemination, for example, turbo cows that produce far more milk than natural, or other animals that gain excessive weight, or male cattle that are converted into breeding bulls or breeding machines. They are the ones who will have to bear the effects of the suffering and misery inflicted on the animals. Whoever allows such manipulations and allows these animals to work for them, but also those who endorse this, bear the burdens that result from it. Many a viewer or many a listener will perhaps realize more and more, in view of these explanations, that the thought, astral horror, is real and becomes a reality more and more in the world. But let us continue to look into this. What about the laboratories for animal experiments? Why are the animals tortured in such a way? Who is the one who will have to bear this? Above all, those who, without conscience, torment them. They are under the law of sowing and reaping. But this also applies just as much to those who build on what is developed from this, who use it for themselves, that is, who benefit from it. They have to answer to the consequences that grow from this and bear them according to the law of cause and effect.
And so, every single action is minutely, precisely, and justly weighed in its energy and allotted accordingly to the people who utilize it. Let us take a look at an example of the chain of possible entanglements of guilt. Whoever uses substances gained from animal experiments in order to style himself beyond a natural measure and gain something for his ego, perhaps to take a partner for himself, has to bear his corresponding part of this. And the one disaster draws more, in turn, after itself. The person who was enticed into this trap of the alleged beauty, that is, the partner, will, in turn, be stimulated to several things, with which he indulges his ego to the point of living out his excessive desires and passions. In this way, it is possible that weaknesses in the said partner come to light, which he in turn lives out with other people. It is possible that temptations increase. The responsiveness to extreme immoral pursuits escalates. A domineering nature, constant rages, aggressions can be the consequences.
Each one who is in such a chain of guilt has to answer for the fact that suffering is increasing globally and also has his part in the original suffering that took place in the animal experiments and the knowledge that was gained from them. Perhaps, for example, further people suffer under the incited and inflated ego aspects of the one who walked into the trap of the alleged beauty. So there is a chain reaction in which the law of sowing and reaping is reproduced, and each one who has a part in it will be weighed and measured according to his part. That is, the contents of his feeling, thinking, speaking, and doing. The suffering of the animals, the suffering of the plants, the suffering of the people will be minutely allotted, and the individual will have to bear the effects at some point in time.
Who knows what all will come out of the manipulations, whether of seeds, cloned animals, genetic manipulations, the addition of substances in baby food, and much, much more. Those who do the research for it, those who try it out, those who utilize it, all of them bear their part in it. All the consequences that come from it will fall back, on the one hand, on the originator, on the other hand, also on those people who know about it and endorse it, including those who legislate and the government. Dear viewers, dear listeners, the clear and unmistakable language of a great prophet of God shakes our consciousness. It clears out the sentimentality like, well, somehow it will all work out, and, well, I'm not that bad, or, even if I did something wrong in my life, so what? But perhaps the clear words of the prophet will stimulate rebellion in many a listener or viewer. Let it come up. Let us think again about what we heard, and those who want to can begin to change their living, thinking, and acting in the future, according to the spirit of the Sermon on the Mount of Jesus of Nazareth and the 10 Commandments of God through Moses. For after all, it's all about nothing less than our own life that lasts eternally. God, The Eternal, our Heavenly Father, is a God of love, who is calling to us, to all of us, His children, through Jesus the Christ, come home. With these words, dear fellow people, we take our leave of you. We wish you and all of us God's blessing, His strength, and all that is good in the coming time. And if you want to, tune in to our next program. It will stay fascinating. Until then, all the best and greetings in God.
Astral horror. That sounds terrifying. However, it's not the words that are terrifying, but the real course of events described in this book. The lack of knowledge about the life of the soul after the body passes on is great. Gabriella, the prophetess and emissary of God in our time, describes in detail what really goes on in the beyond. For instance, how earthbound souls from the beyond can hack into people as into a computer and take their energy for themselves. Astral horror shows the unadorned truth, but it also shows that through His prophets, God our Heavenly Father has shown us the path to our eternal homeland over and over again. Order the book Astral Horror in internet under gabriella-publishing-house.com.
Liebe Zuschauer, liebe Zuschauerinnen.
Dear viewers, dear listeners, welcome to our program for today. On June 14, 2017, we could read the headline of a well-known German tabloid. The Bishop of Osnabrück in Germany blesses zebras and rhinoceroses. And in the accompanying article it said, with this, the Catholic clergyman wanted to set an example for the protection of species and the preservation of creation. 700 elementary school pupils from the bishopric of Osnabrück were present at the blessing. The newspaper further cited the words of the bishop. We human beings, no matter to which religion or nation we belong, have to contribute to and honestly make an effort to preserve this creation in its wonderful diversity.
These are socially acceptable words from a bishop, but the axioms of the Catholic Church speak a different language. Until today, the killing and exploitation of animals is in full accord with canon law. According to the official Catholic Catechism, God allegedly put the animals under the stewardship of man, and man may use them for food and to produce clothing. According to the Catechism, cruel animal experimentation is also permitted. The Church institution's attitude is also seen, for instance, in its approval of cruel factory farming, but also in its terrible customs regarding animals and nature. More than 500,000 geese and 25 million ducks are killed every year just in Germany. About 60% of them die during the last quarter of the year, for a goose, for St. Martin's Day, or roasted for Christmas. And church tradition not only legitimizes the slaughter of animals, it even blesses animals killed by hunters, as the annual masses for St. Hubert demonstrate.
This is church tradition that is in full consonance with the statements of its church leaders. Aurelius Augustine, one of the Vatican Church's highly venerated doctors of the Church, proclaimed, for instance, "We can see from their screams that the animals die in agony, but that does not affect the human being, for the animal lacks a rational soul and is therefore not connected with us through a common nature." And another just as significant and until today highly respected doctor of the Church, Thomas of Aquinas, claimed, and I quote, "We declare that man alone has a subsistent soul, that is, a soul having life of itself, and that the souls of brute animals perish along with their bodies."
Nature, with its animals, plants, and minerals, was declared an object by the doctrine of the Church and treated accordingly. Church doctrine thus gave carte blanche for the killing and exploitation of animals and the destruction of their habitats. The well-known church historian Karl-Heinz Deschner described the church-ordered or allowed use of violence on nature and the animals in its many variations as the blackest of all crimes. Were not the following words in the Bible, wrongly attributed to God, particularly conscientiously put into practice above all by the church institutions? "The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth." In the story of creation in the Bible, God supposedly allowed subdue the earth. For thousands of years, based on the interpretation of this by a caste of priests that calls itself Christian, this sentence has had to serve as justification for every abuse, every exploitation, every brutalization, particularly when it involves the ruthless overexploitation of Mother Earth with all her creatures for humankind. The already mentioned Catholic Catechism states, "God entrusted animals to the stewardship of those whom He created in His own image. Hence, it is legitimate to use animals for food and clothing."
Thereby, the increasing demand for meat is the main reason for the worldwide dying of species, as researchers at Florida International University in Miami determined in 2015. Recent research states that the world is presently in one of the greatest mass extinctions, of which there have been a total of 6 since life began on the earth. But this time, we human beings are the reason for it. According to the opinion of U.S. scientists, a primary factor is our meat consumption, which has drastically increased during recent years. Factory farming has turned animals into a comparatively cheap commodity produced in huge quantities. And this development leads to ever more land being needed for livestock production. Land that other animals need for habitats is lacking. They are pushed out of their natural environment and no longer have a place to live. The results are obvious. Ever more animals are dying out. Then wouldn't the abstention of meat be much more effective for the protection of species and the preservation of animals than the blessing of several zoo animals?
The official doctrine of the Catholic Church says that nature has no soul and that the souls of animals perish at their death. What, dear viewers, dear listeners, should a bishop's Catholic blessing of several zoo animals bring about? An event to which hundreds of children and, of course, also the press were invited. What reason is there that today a few animals are blessed by the Church? Animal worship services are put on, or prayer days for the animals are ordered, but nothing is done to counter the fact that billions of animals die for meat consumption? The fact is that the dogmas of the Catholic Church hold true until today. And Augustine and Thomas Aquinas are doctors of the Church, recognized and canonized in the Church until today. But then, what should we think about the socially acceptable blessing of several zoo animals before many children and well covered by the media?
The well-known German author Wilhelm Busch also reached the conclusion: the blessing of nature is destroyed by the blessing of Rome. The true blessing for this earth would be the love for God and neighbor, taught by Jesus of Nazareth, that is, lived. His message includes, "What you have done to the least of my brothers, you have done to me." His words do not apply solely to human beings, but also include the animals and nature. Dear viewers, dear listeners, with these thoughts, we want to take our leave of you, and we'll be glad if you tune in again next time. Until then, greetings in God and goodbye.
Excessive meat consumption is a severe problem. It causes obesity and illnesses in people. It causes unspeakable torments to the animals in factory farming and an agonizing death in the slaughterhouse. It leaves behind clear-cut rainforests, contaminated soil and water, and a planet Earth that is being driven directly into the climate disaster. Who brought this upon us? Anyone who takes a good look will find the profession that already centuries ago laid the cornerstone for the brutal disregard for life and upholds this tradition until today. Did you know that those who did not participate in this are still, as before, threatened with eternal damnation? Read Vegetarians, Godless Heretics? What vegetarians and meat-eaters alike should know. A book with the dedication for the animals, our fellow creatures from the hands of God. The author has researched a fullness of correlations and facts hardly known until now. He appeals to the reader, don't look away. Look at what's being done to the animals, billionfold. Eat no meat. Do not eat the suffering of the animals. Eating meat is against the law of life. The animal-friendly cookbook, the Vegetarian Folks Cookbook. Many recipes from the international cuisine. Delicious spicy dishes and fruity tasty dishes filled with the energy of life from nature. Quickly prepared and cooked. Order your Vegetarian Vegan Folks Cookbook, the animal-friendly cookbook, with many international recipes beautifully illustrated.